Five people are hoping to be the one to replace Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley on June the 22nd. Now, one of the candidates is MLA for Edmonton Rutherford and a member of the Mitchell First Nation Treaty 6, Jodi Calahoo Stonehouse joins us now from Edmonton. Jodi, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you, Hal. It's great to be with you all.
You bet. Now, Jodi, explain why you think you are the best candidate for the job to replace Rachel Notley.
Well, it's some tough competition for folks to have to decide, but really what it comes down to is who is going to look after all Albertans, who has the skill set and the compassion, the integrity, and the drive to beat Danielle Smith in the UCP and then to clean up the mess. And undoubtedly, that is me.
Let me ask you something, though. You got a pretty big name candidate in Ahead Nenshi, former Calgary mayor. Some people says, it brings a little bit of star power here. How do you beat a name like that in a leadership race?
Well, he does bring star power and he was the mayor, but we just have to look at his record and we have to look at the time that we're at. And right now we are facing a climate crisis, a water crisis, the drought. And my first policy I released was around water protection and allocation because it is foundational to how all of our industries, our agriculture, our irrigation, oil and gas, uh, everything we do revolves around water, and that is essential. So our governance must place priority on that. And I'm the only candidate who has done that. And it's essential to Alberta thriving and surviving.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of dryness this past winter, a lot of drought, not a lot of snowpack in the mountains. So let's flesh out the water agenda a little bit more here. One of your objectives would be to introduce the Albertans' Right to Water Act. Can you explain what this is really all about?
Yeah, as I said, our economic systems rely on water. And right now, we have agreements. The provincial government sat down and we have these agreements, but that's not enough. And so the act itself talks about ways we are going to sit with ranchers, farmers, industry, communities, municipalities, and have these contracts solidified, but also we need to invest in innovation. That is essential to reducing our water use. How are we going to be innovative? And also building an institute of excellence in Lethbridge. We need to invest in academic, rigor, the way our young people are. This is the crisis of their generation. We have to give them the investment, the tools, and the resource to solve this crisis. And it is a crisis. It is a water crisis. Let's be honest. We're at stage 4, and stage 5 is detrimental. And we have cattle to ensure that we have crops to grow. We've got oil and gas we need to continue to process. We want to keep the energy in houses. We want food in the fridge. And so this policy is foundational in ensuring Albertans have access to the resources we need. We want to make sure that the future generation, not just us, but our children and our grandchildren, can also survive and thrive on these beautiful lands.
Now, your plan would also involve establishing a center of excellence at the University of Lethbridge to invest in the research, development, and commercialization of innovative water technologies. So, Jodi, why here in Lethbridge?
Well, we know that the water drought is going to be the most dangerous in southern Alberta. We already know the snowpack, as you mentioned earlier, is the lowest it's ever been. The soil, the moisture is the driest it's been recorded in 105 years. We had the hottest March ever recorded in history. And we've seen down in the rivershed, down below in the bow, that it's the lowest it's ever been. And so we have to invest where the crisis is. We want to make sure that the solution is going to be where it's relevant, so we can ensure that southern ranchers and southern farmers and industry in the south, so that cities like Lethbridge and all the beautiful towns around there, Okotoks, we know they're going to have a huge water problem. We have to make sure that people down in the south are thriving with water. And that's why the investment in Lethbridge, because the crisis is going to hit there the hardest.
Now, you are currently the opposition critic for environment, parks, and climate resilience. What would your priorities be in the area of climate change?
Well, of course, water is foundational. And then we got to look at carbon capture. And we have to really invest in Albertans. We have to invest in our labor and our talent recruitment. And we have to do things a little differently. We're already doing things. We have to double down on renewables. We have this moratorium which has caused huge harm in investment. We have to bring those investors back into Alberta. We have to stabilize our economy because we know many of our systems are broken, the healthcare, the education. And in order to fix those, we need money, which means our economic systems have to be sound, which means energy. Alberta has been the source, the number one economic source around the world because of our oil and gas and our energy. Double down on our renewables, which means getting geothermal. We're already experts in drilling. Geothermal is just another form of drilling. Norway gets 72% of their total power through geothermal, through steam power. So having geothermal, having our wind turbines up and thriving and running properly, getting our solar panels up and making sure we're doing carbon capture, turning the climate crisis into climate economics. That is what is going to make Alberta a global leader and competitor in the market economy, is turning our crisis into our economic system so that we are thriving as Albertans. We need to make sure Albertans have jobs, that families are able to give, the affordability crisis. Part of the part of being on tour with people and going around with Albertans is people are devastated. People are losing their jobs. They can't afford, they're making decisions between utilities and groceries. So we have to increase the economics of our province, and that means doubling down on renewables.
I'm glad you brought up the oil and gas sector and the renewables. Jodi, how do you create that synergy there and that proper balance? Because as you know, the energy sector, oil and gas, employs thousands of Albertans, and then there's also the renewables and opportunity in that regard. So how do you kind of put eggs in both baskets here? Create that synergy.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, Hal. We've got to make the basket bigger and make the basket whole. And all of those systems of energies are what are going to provide for Albertans. It's not this or that, it's all of it. We are going to need all of it. And when pressure was put on oil and gas to reduce their water consumption, because historically it took 5 barrels of water to process a barrel of crude. Now they are down to 1 barrel of water per barrel of crude, which is a substantial accomplishment. And they did it. And they can do it again. And Syncrude and Suncor, they are going to be partners in how we diversify our economy. They also know they want to do things differently because everyone wants their grandchildren to be able to survive and have clean drinking water and air they can breathe. We don't want forest fires all summer. No one wants that. So industry also is just as deeply invested in the transformation. And now we need a government that supports industry, that supports our workers, and that unifies the energy sector. And that's what I'm going to do as leader.
So affordability and economic stability is always an issue here in Alberta. You have an interesting proposal you're calling the Alberta Royalty Dividend. Jodi, explain how
Yes.
that works.
Well, we have to act like owners of our resource. When we think about when Lougheed was in government, we were getting 27 cents per dollar when the oil was big, and now we're down to 20 cents. We are owners of this resource. Let's act like owners. And that means ensuring the royalties are getting to Albertans, ensuring the royalties are getting in your pockets as Albertans. Because right now we are seeing huge profit margins going to CEOs outside of employees being paid and staff being paid. And we have not seen a raise for staff workers and employees of oil and gas, but we have seen existential amounts of money leaving the province and the country in profit margins. Would those profits belong to Albertans in our province and in our territory? That means reallocating and renegotiating agreements with industry to ensure Albertans are getting their share of their royalties, of their resource. But it also means we are going to be accountable for our resource and clean up our mess. With record profits that we've seen, we also have record pollution, which means about being innovative and creating an industry, creating jobs for Albertans to clean up the contamination. We've seen record profits with record contamination, means let's create this as an opportunity. Let's create jobs for Albertans.
Recent polls have showed that the majority of Canadians are dead set against the carbon tax. It's hurt so many industries, including our farmers that use natural gas to heat their barns, dry their grains, and so forth. What are your thoughts when it comes to the federal carbon tax?
It doesn't make sense to penalize citizens. That's not the strategy. And what we've seen with the carbon tax is that it hasn't been implemented in a way that it's working. It needs to be polluter pay. If an industry is polluting, they need to be held accountable. If they're not going to clean it up, then you pay and then we hire folks to clean it up. So when we think about the carbon tax, it's not about penalizing citizens, it's about holding industry accountable that is polluting our water and our airspace and causing harm for our children and grandchildren. So, yes, it can work, but we need to get the science so that we are tracking pollution properly and that we are holding industry. So, I believe in polluter pay.
So in other words, let's change the focus and not penalize the average everyday Albertan. Jodi, when someone buys a membership with the provincial NDP, you automatically become a member with the federal NDP. And they're connected now. Some people don't really like the idea of being connected to Jagmeet Singh. He hasn't really been much of an opposition leader, some people would argue, and propping up and supporting the Liberal government here. So how can you create some separation, or do you even want that from the federal NDP?
Well, I think that's a very important decision to be made, Hal, by the members of the New Democrat Party. That is a decision that needs to be made by all the caucus members, by MLAs, and by the members of the party itself. That is to be up for debate. We need to flush it out. Are we connected? Are we relevant? Are we relational? Are we doing good work together? Do we have the same values? Will this change when a new leader for the federal party changes? These are questions we have to talk about and be honest with one another. And as the leader, I will make the decision based on how the citizens choose.
Now, Jodi, being a First Nations person, what are your thoughts on achieving reconciliation, not only here in Alberta, but across the country?
Oh, how this is such an important question. And we're seeing such amazing work transform around the country and in Alberta. We're seeing so many acts of reconciliation where communities are working together. We see it down south in Lethbridge. We're seeing it up north. We're seeing, Indigenous knowledge and wisdom. I mean, we've been living sustainably on our homelands for time immemorial. And so now it's time to draw on that ancestral knowledge so that all of us can survive as our ancestors intended when they sat together in treaty. As long as the sun shines and the grass grows, we're supposed to live together as relatives. Well, the rivers are going to stop flowing. So, what are we going to do as relatives to fix the problem for all of us? And this really is about reconciliation. It's about ensuring that all of our children and grandchildren have a bright future right here in our beautiful province.
And that everybody has access to clean drinking water. That's key as well, right? Now, Jodi, the housing crisis continues across the nation. There seems to be debate within party ranks as to whether or not rent control would bring a net benefit to Albertans. How do you see it?
Rent control, as I see it, is a band aid to a systemic issue. Let's put on a band aid to stop the hemorrhaging, but let's get to the root of the issue, which is affordability and creating housing that is affordable. And as government, with record profits, we can invest in affordable housing and then build wraparound services because we know in Alberta we have folks with complex needs that need to be supported. Housing just isn't enough. So, providing folks with the supports, we have more children than ever before in our history in child welfare. That means we're doing something wrong. So, we have to create systems of support that create healthy families so they can thrive, so they can live together and afford to pay their bills. Poverty is the crippler. People can't afford housing and groceries. That's what causes the harm. So, addressing affordability is essential, which is why getting to the root of it is our resources, ensuring we have equity, ensuring we're investing in our talent and our youth, creating jobs for people so that people can, have these wonderful families. That's the goal for all Albertans. We all want to have our family in our home. So, let's make it possible. And it is possible. We are the richest province in the country. We have to make our priority us.
Now, when it comes to healthcare, Jodi, what kind of changes would you like to see to be most beneficial for Albertans?
growing up with my dad being a paramedic and a nurse, and my grandmother a nurse, and my cousin a doctor, I have listened to stories of the degradation ever since the nuns left the healthcare, the cleaning. And now we are at a crisis where families are waiting on hours upon hours to see a doctor. And some families in the rural areas have to drive up to 8 hours to see a doctor. That's not acceptable. That's not okay. So, the work we have to do, first of all, is get our doctors back from British Columbia. We have to respect them, offer contracts that are meaningful. We want doctors in the rural, we want doctors in the city. We also have to respect our nurses, the helpers, right down to the people who clean the floors in the hospitals. Their jobs are just as essential and important, which means having respectful negotiations, making sure that they are being paid appropriately, that their contracts are solidified, and working with people in the system to build it, trusting the experts. Bureaucrats and politicians are not experts in healthcare. We have to trust the people who are the experts and believe in them and build and repair the systems with them.
Jodi, Calahoo Stonehouse is the MLA for Edmonton Rutherford and one of 5 candidates vying to replace Rachel Notley as the leader of the Alberta NDP. Jodi, thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Thank you, Hal, and thank you to everyone at Bridge City. See you soon.